Hi everyone, this is my presentation. This is my read aloud that I did for my class in Mary V. Duffy School. The book I used was The Seasons of Arnold's Apple Tree by Gail Gibbons. I unfortunately did not have my book. I don't have my props either because I left them at school. So this is how I will be doing my presentation today. And I found this really good read aloud online on YouTube. It's about 6 minutes long. It's great. You should really listen to it. I really love this book and I'm glad that I picked it. It's a classic. So to begin, the standards that I used were, this is not only including my read aloud, this is part of what my extension activities were because I actually did do them with the class. And I did, with prompting and support, recall important facts from a familiar text, understand the relationship between numbers and quantities, sort, order, pattern, and clarify objects by non-measurable and measurable attributes. So this is obviously the first one was for my read aloud, and then the last two have to do with some of the activities that I did. So my objective for the read aloud was during a conversation about colors of a tree, students will be able to recall the colors associated with different seasons. So my focus was was colors of the different seasons and what colors go on a tree in the different seasons. And this not only works well for the read aloud, but this is also something I did in the centers as well. Since I went to a few different centers during my lesson. The assessment I used was a checklist. I thought the checklist was the easiest way to be able to assess someone because in the checklist you already have out what you want them to know. And then if they don't reach that mark, you don't check that box off. So I did use this for my centers, for my stations, and I did this for my read aloud as well, even though it was kind of difficult because I couldn't really write on the paper at the same time. But I did keep in mind, so I only kept in mind one or two students at the time, and my supervisor said it was completely okay because during this we can't really keep track of every single student at a time, so it's just a little bit at a time. So I picked two students to focus on. This is what it looked like. Students can name the colors, students can count the apples on the tree, students can match the color to the season, students can describe what they see, and then the notes. So I have student A and student B. I think this is my fault that I waited way too long to ask the important questions, so they didn't get one of them, but I do believe that they do have it down, but I started to lose their attention towards the end a little bit. And then I have my notes section, just little notes for yourself. For example, one of the students, when we were in the centers, he was sorting the colors with different shades. He was only 4 years old and he was saying, well, this is dark green and this is light green, and then this green has black on it. And then we have the other student who still couldn't tell apart black and brown and had a really hard time doing that. So those were just some side notes that I put. They're not here, but on my other sheet of paper, I did put those notes down where just these differences in the students and just how far along they are with knowing their colors. So for my lesson, sorry for the really messy picture, but this is all I could find since I couldn't find my props, but I painted a trifold with a bare blank brown tree on there, and I had Velcro on some of the branches, and then I printed out green and red apples. I printed out apple blossoms. I printed out a rain cloud. I printed out a sun, a bee, a swing set, some snow, and then different colored leaves. So the students, as I was going along with the story, they would come up, take off, or put on something for our tree. So, for example, the story started off with spring, and spring had apple blossoms and green leaves. So I would always ask the students, well, what do you see now? What's different? What colors do you see now for spring? And then they'll say, well, I see the apple blossoms, and they are pink and white, and then I see green leaves, and I see a bee. And So I would say, okay, so what should we add to our tree since it is springtime? And then I'll have a student come up and they'll put on some green leaves. I had a student come up and put up the apple blossoms. I had a student come up and put up the bee. And it was just a really great time. And then we did the same thing for all the rest of the seasons, and then followed by summer. There were still some green leaves, but now the apple blossoms were no longer apple blossoms. They turned into apples. So I would ask them, well, what's different now about summertime? What do you see now? And then they will say, well, there's no more apple blossoms. And I'm like, that's right. Where did they go? And then they would say, well, now they're apples. And yes, they are apples. And what color are the apples now? And then they'll say it's green. And then in the story they also mentioned how hot it was, so there was a yellow sky and there was a yellow sun, so I did put the sun up there. And then they mentioned how the tree shaded him from the rain, so I had a rain cloud there as well that they could put up on there. Every single person got a chance to come up. And then for fall, we had the golden leaves and then red apples, so I had the students come up and say the color. And then also, while we were putting the apples up, we would count how many apples are there now. 1, 2, 3. And how many apples, if we took one off, well, how many do we have now? 1, 2. And then so I also incorporated counting in there, and I also incorporated the colors with all of the seasons. And then for winter, I'm like, well, what's now in winter? And they'll say, well, there's no more leaves. No, there's no more leaves. So I had someone come up and take off all of the leaves. And then I did have some printed snow that they could Velcro on there. So I had someone come up and put snow on there. And it was just a really great time, and everyone had a great time. And every single person got a chance to come up and take something off or put something on. And they were engaged. And even the one child who can't walk, he was able to come up and crawl over and take something off the tree and put it on the tree. And it was just a really great experience because every single person was able to be included, which is exactly what I wanted and included in my differentiation part of the lesson plan. So for my next steps, since I mentioned before how I didn't get the results that I wanted on my lesson or my assessment, so my next steps would be again to go over the season again with my students, but to ask all of the important questions at the way beginning so I don't lose their interest towards the end. And then I can further proceed to talk about what kind of animals live in trees and what trees can be made into, because I know I saw a book on that and I thought that was great because the tree um, got into the pencils that we draw with, and they turn into the paper that we draw with, and it turns into a house. And it was just very interesting to see that. So I think that's the next step that I would take with this lesson. And then now I'm going to go into what I did for all of the centers. So for discovery, I had different kinds of leaves that were laminated, and I had sorting cards with different colors on them. So as I went, so I would say, okay, so now we're going to talk about summertime. So what color did we see with summertime? And I did have a hard time getting their attention and getting them to give the answer that I kind of wanted to hear, but we made it work and they did great. And they had all of these magnifying glasses and they sorted it by color, and it was just a really great time because they seemed really invested until they weren't, which is then when we switched to a different I let them switch to a different center. For table toys, I had different colored trees. So I had felt treetops, and then I put the felt treetops on top of um, paper towel rolls or toilet paper rolls. And I had different colored pom-poms. So the students all had different kinds of tweezers that they could choose from, and then they would have to take the tweezer and put the right colored pom-pom in the right colored tree because each of the trees had colored apples on them to kind of go with the pom-poms. So it was a sorting game and it was a counting game because they could count as well as they're putting it in, and it's also really good for their motor skills. The kitchen, I made pie tins and pie covers with tan felt and strips of dough. And I had recipe cards, and each of the recipe cards had different quantities of numbers on them. So, for example, there were always green, red, and yellow apples. And then, so on one recipe card, it'd be like 2 red apples and 3 yellow apples, and then 2 green apples. And then they would have to put that amount of pom poms in that pie before covering it with the pie cover, and then by themselves put it in the oven totally by themselves. And I was really impressed. One student even did lattice work all by herself, and no one taught her how to do that, and we were just all very impressed, and I loved watching that. For the blocks, I had a harder time thinking of something to do with this, so we decided to put just tree pictures on the blocks, and then have the children make cities or roads with the trees that they could. I see that I have a spelling error here, so I'm going to do that. And I had the children make cities or roads with what they're familiar with. So I would ask them, well, where do you see trees when you go home? What kind of trees do you see? So I would try and get them to recreate a road going home or something that they've seen where they've seen trees before, and try to incorporate the trees into their building. For art, this was actually something I'm going to talk about as one of my favorite experiences. But I had a loose parts activity. I had a whole bunch of branches that I collected from outside, and I had a whole bunch of different loose parts on a tray. And they all had to do with, they were red, yellow, green, um, and like brown parts, so it could all kind of go with what the seasons were. I kind of wanted to do, well, like, let's decorate this tree like it's summer, so they would use like the green parts, but that didn't really work out. But they still had a great time working with the loose parts and decorating the tree, and it was just really great because the students really loved it, and they continued using it even after the lesson was done and the day was done, and they still used it the days after my lesson. So this is when my favorite experience comes in. So it's bringing in my materials for my first lesson plan. I had all my sensors set up, and the children loved my art idea. The loose parts, they loved it. The teacher even decided to continue using it. Unfortunately, the branches did grow some spiders, because I guess there were some eggs in there. So spiders started to come out of there. So we had to throw those out. But the my teacher said she was going to purchase some fake branches so that they could keep using them and decorating them, because that was the center that every student would use every single day, and they just loved decorating those branches with the loose parts and then taking them apart and then putting stuff back on. So it was just a really great experience that I was able to incorporate something I learned into the classroom that my teacher loved and she's going to keep using. So we kind of were learning from each other, and I thought that was a really great experience. My aha moment from this course is something I talk about all the time to my fiance and my family, and it's something that I stress on how much reading can change a child's vocabulary and change just how they speak and how they write. And it's just so interesting. I remember when we saw the statistics on how low income families are significantly less exposed to conversation, reading, and resources to be have the type of vocabulary that um, richer or better income families are, which was very, very interesting. And now I just stress it to everybody, just read all the time to your kids, read all the time, no matter like what kind of book it is, even if it's a little above their reading level, you could still read it to them as long as they understand it. But they're just going to keep, like, all of these words that they hear, they're just going to keep being put in their head, and they're eventually going to grow upon it. So I can't stress enough just how important it is to read and to have conversation, and just, try and expose your child or any child to everything in the world, because they're just sponges and they absorb, especially like in the younger ages. And we're early childhood, and these children are sponges and they absorb absolutely everything. So I think it's very important for us to give them absolutely everything so that they can absorb as much as they can and fill their schemas with as much as we can and expand their vocabularies, and just try and get that low income families to, you know, to make that statistic change, and try and get these students to to just build on the vocabulary. So that's something that has stuck with me since the very beginning. I think that was like maybe the first chapter that we covered, and it's just stuck with me the whole semester. And it's just something I'm never going to forget, and it's just something that really impacted me. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I don't think I have anything else to say, but I did have a really great time, and thank you for listening.